The world is facing a labour crisis. That's because women are being left behind, largely because of the difficult task of balancing jobs and children. So, what can be done to even that out and help get mothers back into work? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Having children is costly. It turns out, not just in terms of raising them, but also because working mothers earn much less than working fathers. One estimate suggests it'll take 170 years to close that gender gap. Can we get there any quicker?
English singer-songwriter Lily Allen recently joked that having children ruined her career, while US tennis legend Serena Williams has described being a mum as her greatest achievement. Both agree, though, that juggling work and motherhood can be a challenge. Many women don't rejoin the workforce at all after giving birth, even a decade later. Others find their careers stalled and get fewer opportunities to take on higher paid roles. In a 2020 poll, 2 in 5 mothers in the UK said having children had harmed their career. 9% of women said the impact of parenthood on their work had been very negative, while only 2% of men with children reported a similar experience. This has been dubbed the motherhood penalty. For those on lower incomes, this balancing act becomes near impossible. The UK charity Pregnant Then Screwed says 3 in every 4 mothers who pay for childcare feel it no longer makes financial sense to work. 1 in 10 say they actually spend more on care than their take-home pay. It's a similar story in places like the Netherlands, Ireland, the US and Canada. And because many mothers are forced into part-time work or into abandoning their careers altogether, they're penalised again further down the line in retirement.
They're subject to a system that pushes them to take care of domestic tasks, to look after their children, to look after their home, and so they have to work part-time. They will then also suffer in terms of their retirement, so the government should really take the situation into consideration.
Back in the UK, the government now provides limited free childcare for working parents, which is due to expand further in 2025. But some parents can't afford the top-up fees charged by many nurseries, and while demand for childcare is expected to rise, government figures show the number of childcare places actually fell in 2023. With mothers left trying to juggle it all, the question is, if nothing changes, will more women leave the workforce, or will they be forced to abandon plans to have children altogether?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining me from Santa Barbara in the United States is Bonnie Marcus. She's an executive coach, author, speaker and podcast host. In Hampshire in the UK, Joanna Jensen. She is the founder of a family skincare brand, Child's Farm. Here in the studio with me is Gabriel Leite-Mariante. He's co-author of the Child Penalty Atlas. That's a study that measured the so-called motherhood penalty in 134 countries. And Bryan McIntosh, Professor of Healthcare Management at Brunel University. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Joanna, I'll come to you first. I was intrigued by that interview by Lily Allen, the English pop star, recently, where she said motherhood ruined her career. Do you think a lot of women will have listened to what she said and thought, you know what, she's got a point?
I think, for me, motherhood made my career. So I've got motherhood to thank for the fact that I came up with the idea of Child's Farm. So it depends how you embrace it. I know as a working parent, it's all about trying to get some kind of balance. But the reality is there isn't much balance. And I think what Lily was trying to say was that for her, she had to make that choice, career or motherhood. And I think that's the crux of it, really, isn't it? We have to try and get a balance if we can. I think this has been an age-old problem with working mothers in particular. Do you stick to bringing up your children or do you manage your career? And then some of us have got the wherewithal to actually manage to do both quite well. And I think we're all, the world is a garden in which many different flowers grow, thank goodness. And all of us need certain things and some of us don't need all of it. some of us want it all, and actually some of us don't need it all.
Bonnie, that question, can women have it all? What does it all amount to? Is it having the successful career, seeing enough of your family, seeing enough of your partner, balancing life? Is that what having it all is meant to be?
Well, I think having it all is a very personal question, but I know that working with ambitious women, career-minded women, it's a very difficult journey. First of all, women are still responsible for most of the domestic work. And so they have an extra burden, certainly when they have children. But in the workplace, the motherhood penalty is a reality where new moms especially are thought of as less invested in their career, less committed, all kinds of assumptions that they don't want to work that hard. And the result is that they're passed up for a lot of leadership roles or special assignments. And they aren't viewed in the same way as having that kind of leadership status. Plus, they're taking a hit with their salary. And for the most part, at least in the United States, women, new moms are earning 58 cents to the dollar of fathers. So
wow.
It's a hit on all levels.
Bryan, that's a very good point, isn't it? I just want to bring Bryan in, Bonnie. I mean, women going back into the workplace, paid less opportunity. This is a real talking point.
100%. I couldn't agree more with the two previous speakers. And that impact is exacerbated by the number of children as well. So, for example, if a woman takes a career break from the workplace, she may leave the workplace for a year, then come back part-time, often at a reduced role with reduced responsibilities. That's quite frequently happens. The evidence for that is overwhelming. That's a cumulative process. So if they have a second child, a third child, the degree of disadvantage, let's call it disadvantage in terms of career outcomes and career incomes becomes manifest. So women are doubly hit because the skills that they acquire, particularly at motherhood, aren't weighted. I've never had a child, obviously. So, but it's quite apparent to bring up children requires a massive amounts of other softer skills, what we sometimes call softer skills, which aren't valued. So when they re-entry into the workplace, this combination of factors makes it more difficult. The evidence is quite interesting. Women have better career outcomes than men at the beginning. But when they have children, it goes off the scales. Now, I'm not saying anything that isn't new, but the evidence for that is very compelling.
It's backed up. Gabriel, do you think companies look at women differently after they've had a baby? Then when they return to the workforce, they're seen as somehow less than women without children, less than male workers?
Well, I think that the data sort of backs the idea that all across the world, there seems to be a huge inequality in the impacts on the employment of women relative to men after the birth of a first child. So in some sense, I think the entire labor market is sort of treating men and women differently after the birth of a first child. If in a world in which the role of sort of care for newborn, for children at home is equally split between men and women, we would see a difference of 0. But what we'd see is we see a huge difference across pretty much every country in the world. So in some sense, yes.
I want to read some statistics for you, Joanna, just for our viewers as well. 27% of working mothers said they felt their career progression had stalled after children. This is in the UK, and this data comes from a study by the Fawcett Society. That compares to only 21% of men. 84% of women said they faced challenges after returning to work. Only 74% of men said they felt the same. And women's top concerns were feeling guilty or anxious about leaving their child, balancing work and childcare responsibilities, and the affordability of childcare. In your experience, is that a driving force, the affordability of childcare?
Oh my goodness, it is a problem in this country, and I know that for a normal working couple, 25% of their income is spent on childcare. Now, for me, I was bringing up my kids on my own, so I can tell you about 50% of my income was spent on childcare, so I could continue to develop my business. And I think it is, we're way behind the curve when it comes to our European counterparties here. And, Iceland, that same income spent on full-time childcare is 5%. I mean, in the UK, we used to have childcare vouchers and they were phased out for whatever reason, I don't know. And that allowed you to have part of your salary put aside and without tax being removed from it, which you could then use to pay for your childcare. But in Britain, we need to get back on this, and we need to really be more flexible. We need to allow for more flexible part-time work. We need to help people a bit more with their childcare costs, make it more affordable for people. And I'm afraid that comment about guilt, I think the moment you give birth to a suitcase of guilt, and it hangs around with you. Mine are in their late teens and it's still hanging around me. You feel guilty about everything you do, you don't do. We just have to get over it.
Wow, Bonnie, that is quite a claim there, isn't it? A suitcase of guilt. Just talk me through childcare in the United States. How expensive is it?
Oh, the costs are exorbitant, to the point where I believe that a lot of young couples are reconsidering whether or not they want children. And I don't know the exact statistics about the drop in the birth rate, but I know it's something that a lot of couples are considering because they can't manage on their income. First of all, the woman has less income once she becomes a mother, and the cost of taking care of a child can put them over the edge. As far as the guilt is concerned, I agree. I mean, from the minute that you give birth, you have this push and pull, which you will have throughout your career. And some women opt out for a while. Some women choose to go part-time. But again, it depends on their career trajectory, because for the most part, taking that part-time, taking that flexibility will be very detrimental to their career.
Bryan, do governments need to do more on the affordability of childcare? Because women are working and so much of what they're earning is going straight back to pay for the children that they can't be, and their partners, minding because mummy and daddy have gone out to work.
For the last 14 years, I have been saying this. Government, as recently as last week within the United Kingdom, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer said that the workforce in the UK could be expanded. Now, it's very simple. Direct subsidy. If you wish to increase the workforce, if you're serious about increasing the workforce, and you have some of the most highly skilled people out of the workforce because they have family responsibilities, the solution is not very hard. Direct subsidy through taxation, vouchers, there's a whole host of mechanisms which can provide that. But there has to be an appetite to do it, a serious appetite to do it. Because if you're serious about growing an economy, you have to grow the workforce, you have to bring in people with the skills in that workforce. So, yes, I've been saying this like a broken record for 14 years. The solutions are not complicated, but you have to have the willingness and the political appetite to introduce them.
Gabriel, so many elections around the world this year. You'll hear lots of talk about taxation, migration, defence spending. Childcare and its affordability is never an election issue.
Well, I think, yeah, it's. I completely agree with my my fellow panelists. I think that childcare is a very important policy issue, and there's a lot of a lot of studies that show that increasing childcare subsidies, either directly or through child support, do have an impact in the probability that the labor force becomes a bit more equal and that women are more likely to continue in employment. And I think that this shows that providing this subsidy actually is sort of, in some sense, providing people with more choice, right? So you can make a more informed choice about employment, about rules of care with the support of the government, right? So I think it's a super important policy issue, and definitely it's something we should be discussing more.
Joanna, I want to ask about your career, how you launched your brand. Just tell us the story of how you became one of the standout working mum success stories in the United Kingdom. Just talk us through your journey.
Oh, well, and I really started with the birth of my second child, Bella, in 2008. And the poor little thing was born with atopic eczema, which is very typical in the UK. 1 in 5 under 5s is born with atopic eczema. But when I went to find something to soothe her irritated skin, nothing had changed since when I was a girl and I had eczema. And I thought, this ain't right. And so in a fit of pique, I went from an investment banker to, in effect, a cosmetics founder. And I created a whole range of products for her skin specifically. But of course, because they work for her, I knew they'd work for these other children throughout the UK and indeed now throughout the world. And it was, you know, I had a mission. I decided I was doing this for my child. My circumstances at home meant that I didn't have any work-life balance, and my children were at times latchkey kids. But, you know, the way I look at this is I was just quite determined. I knew what I wanted to do. I'm a very driven individual. I can get by on not very much sleep. And what I have done is I've shown my children how to be proactive, how to be determined, how to win, how to work hard, and all that it entails. And I think that is really important, because at the moment, our levels of activity in the UK have gone down since COVID. And we sort of around 21% levels of inactivity. And we've got to look realistically about what the government could do, because right now we're £2.6 trillion in debt, and that is rising by 100 billion every year. So I think, you know, if we're trying to balance the books at home, we need to make some honest decisions ourselves as well about, do I really want to look after my child? And, you know, when I look back, I'm so jealous of those full-time mums. I really am, because I miss so much of my children's childhood. But I know I did the right thing for me, and I did the right thing for them. And now, of course, as they're older and I'm working less hard, I get to enjoy them all the more when actually they don't really want to see me anymore.
Bonnie, isn't that an incredible success story? Just the, you know, necessity being the mother, literally, of invention, and Joanna creating a wonderful brand and a very successful company. How much talent is out there that companies are overlooking because they do seem to pack mums off into a box once they've given birth?
True. You know, I just want to make a point here that motherhood has tremendous benefits. And I think that, you know, from my own experience, I become much more empathetic, much more patient and resilient. And though I really didn't take any time off, I came back to the workplace after a very short leave. I know that I was a better manager and a better colleague in the workplace because of my motherhood responsibilities. So I think that companies are really losing out when they shortchange and they sideline new moms, because we have so much that we can bring, so much value that we can bring to the workplace, whether or not we're managers or you know, members of a team.
Thanks, Bonnie. Bryan, companies and the leadership of companies really need to step in here, don't they? And, you know, we're seeing a pattern, we're hearing incredible stories. You know, mothers have so much to offer a company. 100%,
and it's part of that is the mindset of the organisations. And this will be a very familiar statement I'm going to make to the panellists and to the wider audience. When someone has to come back into the workplace, we're hardwired to full-time working. We should be open to the possibilities that the familial circumstances allow a more flexible approach to the workplace. Not just full-time being the commonality. Who says that a chief executive can't be part-time? Are we open to that possibility? How we view the work and the workplace? Organisational values, which is the thing that you're alluding to, can sometimes be a barrier to growth. If you accept the proposition that people have skills through motherhood, through life experiences, utilising these life experiences to the benefit of the whole company, to the business, seems logical.
Gabriel, talk to us about the global picture. You've written books about this, you've done a huge amount of research. Which countries are good for mothers?
So what we find in our sort of comparison across the countries is that we're measuring the difference in the effects of having a first child in the probability of men and women being employed after the first of a first child. So how are mothers affected differently from fathers in terms of their probability of being employed after the birth of the first child? And one of the most sort of interesting findings from our research is that actually this is a phenomenon that happens pretty much everywhere, right? Some countries have a much higher, what the literature, the research calls the child penalty or the motherhood penalty. Some countries have a much higher value than others in terms of the impact, the differential impact on women relative to men, and some countries have a smaller value, but there's no country in the world in which it's the other way around, in which we have a higher impact for men than for women. So what we see is a picture of men and women following very parallel trajectories until the moment of the birth of a first child, in which case there is a very sharp drop in employment probability for mothers and not so much for fathers. So in some sense, it's spread out across the world. We see the highest numbers for this difference in Latin America, in Western Europe, and in some places in North Africa and the Middle East. But the other interesting thing that we find in this study is that actually we can take the overall gender gap in employment between men and women of the labor market and see how much of that gender gap can be explained by this motherhood penalty, right? So in places like the UK and in most countries in Western Europe, we find that almost the entirety of the gender gap is explained by the difference after the birth of the first child. Whereas in other countries, for example, in Southeast Asia or in Sub-Saharan Africa, you have a large gender gap, and the impact caused by children after the birth of the first child is actually relatively small. So there are other factors here that might be playing a role in this gender gap in employment.
Joanna, just give us your advice to any young mum who is watching and wondering, will it get better? What should I do? I've got an idea. How can I make it happen? What would you say to any young mum out there right now who's perhaps struggling a little bit and looking for some ray of light?
I think, look, you've got to know yourself. You've got to know what makes you flourish as an individual, not forgetting if you're flourishing, then your little ones are going to flourish. So you need to think about your needs because your needs directly impact them. And if you are concerned about your workplace and how long that's going to continue, don't be afraid to voice those concerns to somebody in a position of authority that you can talk to. But my belief is very strongly, if you continue to show that you are a valuable member of your team, don't be afraid to remind them of that as well, because I think that's really important. We're very bad at telling people how much we contribute, women are, by and large. But you have to remember your health and well-being should be at the paramount of everything that you do. But just because you've got a child, it's not an impediment. It is actually, in my case, without my children, I would have never have had the amazing business that I've created. So look at it as an opportunity, because it is. And motherhood is the most, it's the world. It's the most wonderful thing that can happen to anyone. So embrace it and enjoy it, and don't let it bring you down. Let it rise you up.
Fantastic advice. Bonnie, final question to you. What advice would you give to any young working mum wondering, is this going to get better?
Well, I think that It's important that you choose the right company, that you know what the benefits are, and especially if you know that you want to have a family. It's really important. At least here in the United States, the benefits vary tremendously based on what state you live in, and based on which company. And even within a company, the departments could be different, and how they view a pregnant woman and a new mom. But it's important to, as Joanna said, to really know what you want, to really be clear, and to communicate to your manager, to your HR team, and to know what that plan will be.
Bonnie, Joanna, Bryan and Gabrielle, thank you all so much. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.